welcome to Season 12, Episode 11 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop,
I am Mark Bishop.
and we are, of course, reading Allan Bloom's The Closing of the American Mind, this time talking about his chapter on the Nietzscheanization of the left, or vice versa. So still in this path where he's talking about nihilism and its impact on sort of modern culture and politics. This time focusing really, not too much on Nietzsche, it seems like. It was a lot about Marx and about ideologies sort of more broadly. It was an interesting chapter, another pretty short one, so it shouldn't be too long here. But I thought it was pretty good. I thought it was an interesting look at, how Marxism has sort of changed and how it's been sort of adapted to the left a little bit. That was very interesting.
Yes.
You were mentioning beforehand that you weren't feeling very talkative.
Well, I'm tired. It is almost my bedtime, which means after 9 p.m.
Which means it's an hour later for me.
Well, you're young and just got back from a dance lesson. I'm an excellent dancer.
That's what you keep saying.
And I mentioned before we started, I don't know why this is relevant, but I'm going to say it.
Sure.
I'm rereading The Hobbit, and it's an excellent book.
Yes.
And it's been so long since I read it, probably since I either read it to you or to Jonah, maybe to Jonah when he was little. And I've forgotten how much the movie deviates from the storyline.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, a lot in substantial ways. And the book is so much better. I mean, the movies are great, and I really enjoy the Hobbit movie, and I really enjoy that better than Lord of the Rings movies. But
it's a crazy opinion to have.
Well, the first one, the first Hobbit movie.
The first of the Hobbit trilogy is actually a pretty good movie. I really like that one. They're all fun to watch. The first one at least stays somewhat close to the book. But yeah, the other two kind of go off the rails. So
yeah. But I was struck by how much braver Bilbo is in the book than he is in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
He's more honest about the ring. A little spoiler alert. With the dwarves, he tells them about it when he's taking on the spiders. And he basically just attacks the spiders.
Right.
Like she was.
Well, Tolkien even he was going to it was kind of an aborted project he had that he was starting to rewrite the entire Hobbit book more in line with like the feeling of the Lord of the Rings some years after the Lord of the Rings came out, because he thought it was just such a different shift in tone, going from the Hobbit to the Lord of the Rings. He was kind of experimenting with it. I don't know if it was ever planned to publish, but the first chapter or so he started to rewrite like in the style of the Lord of the Rings, the much more serious, especially in regarding the ring. I mean, he had to do that anyway. He changed the chapters at chapter 5, I want to say, Riddles in the Dark, where Bilbo finds the ring. The first edition of The Hobbit it's a much more playful thing with him and Gollum, where Gollum freely gives over the ring. He's like, well, you beat me at the riddle game, here's the ring. And so you kind of have that lighthearted attitude. And when he was writing the sequel to The Hobbit, which became Lord of the Rings, he realized, no, this is much more important of a thing. And so for the second edition and from there on out of The Hobbit, there was a different chapter. So if you ever find a first edition of The Hobbit, it'll have a different chapter in there. And so those are very highly sought after because it changes the story quite a bit.
Interesting. Well, I enjoy the book so much more, and and it's nice. It's kind of a light read, but also kind of serious undertones. But I enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, yes, that's good, but has very little to do with this chapter here. So we should talk about that a little bit. I thought it was interesting the way he starts. You look like you were about to say something. Were you about to make a comment there?
I don't know. I mean, I think that. Never mind. That's good.
All right. He says, kind of how he starts out. He says, to put it crudely, Marx has become boring, and not only to American youngsters. In some backwaters, grim autodidacts may still thrill to the rhetoric of, quote, workers of the world, while third world presidents of one-party states focus their resentments by invoking the authority of Marx. But in the centers where people keep up to date and ideologies are made, Marx has been dead for a long time. That was an interesting take, because I think you still hear about Marxism all the time, but I think there's quite a bit of truth to that it's, kind of a boring thing. It's not quite as interesting to see a college student walking around, with the Communist Manifesto. It's almost like you just kind of expect that, right? It's not as much of a statement as I think it once was to be a big follower of Marx. It's kind of like, yeah, I guess you are.
I guess. Do you think?
I mean, I think on college campuses for sure. Maybe out in like the broader world, but I mean, if I see a big Marxist poster on a professor's door, like I hardly bat an eye. I kind of look at it and be like, "Oh, that's stupid," but
Yeah.
it's very, very common. I think in some
They're
ways it has become
tiresome.
boring.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're
yeah, it's very
tiresome.
tiresome.
But it's not. I think he overstates it a little bit
Mm,
because it still seems to be popular. He's acting like, well, it's just boring and stupid, and nobody pays attention to Marx anymore. I don't know that that's true, but
right.
the he does mention, and when you get into the writings of Rousseau is more of a dangerous writer. He's
Yeah.
a little more passionate, and you can kind of hang on to it a little bit more than this, the class BS of
Hmm.
Marx. But there's I think I don't know. I think Marxism is still a fundamental ideology, and I think even maybe more so. I think that's why it's
Mm,
so common to see, on a professor's official door, office door, something about Marx or Marxism or like a Communist Manifesto
right.
or what.
I mean,
Because I think it's just become so ingrained in some areas.
right.
Uh,
I think he kind of acknowledges that sort of on the bottom of that first paragraph. He
mm,
says, like, the intellectual death of their eponymous hero has not stopped much of the left from continuing to call itself Marxist, for he represents the poor and their perennial struggle against the rich and their demand for more equality than liberal societies provide. Then he says, but really, a lot of the ideological basis is coming from more than just Marx now. But it's
yeah,
still that fundamental tenet is still there, and they still kind of cling to him. It's still that very much ideal figure that you have to be sort of a follower of him to have any sort of influence upon the left. Like he's the core of it in some ways, but in some ways that makes him a little bit boring.
yeah, and well, if you actually read Marx and to try to apply it practically, it doesn't work. As he
Hmm.
mentions in 219, he says uh, the beginning of the inner rot that finally made Marxism unbelievable to anyone who thinks. Marxism itself became an ideology because
Hmm.
the concept, of communism, that we'll get beyond ideology and it'll just be like
Right.
this utopia,
Hmm.
which is nowhere, of course. Um, and we'll all share everything in this perfect society, and nobody believes that. So I
Right.
think he's right in the sense that if you actually look into what Marx was espousing and Marxist beliefs are, when you drill down to them and you question people about it, it's like, well, they don't even believe it.
Hmm.
It's just like a means to an end, or an
Right.
excuse for violence, or an
Right.
excuse for resentment. And so I think he's right about that, and he brings in the Nietzscheanization of the left or vice versa, which is basically that the left is just kind of glomming on to some of Nietzsche's thoughts,
Right.
and all the followers of Nietzsche are these left-wing ideologues, which is kind of ironic in a way because the whole Marxism thing was try to get beyond ideology and
Right.
get to some purity of thought and unanimity of belief system without these separate, factionals, I guess,
Right.
ideologies.
Yeah, 'cause that's what he says, because it's like the scientific theory of Marxism, scientific theory, of course, in quotes. He says that's what it was originally said to be. That's what Marx was arguing for. But then he says, top of page 219, he says, however, by 1905, Lenin was speaking of Marxism as an ideology, which means that it too can make no claim to truth. Right? Because if you're saying, well, this is, only things that are free from ideology can claim any, adherence to the truth, which is what Marx was saying. But then once your idea becomes an ideology, well, then okay, then any claim to truth you have is also gone. And I still remember this. This was we had a debate in undergrad, our college Republican club versus the communists, the Students for Communism, who used to be the Students for a Democratic Society, which then became the Progressive Students Alliance, which then became the Students for Communism on campus. But they were like very much in that mindset. They were very interesting people to talk to. Weirdly very nice, but also openly calling for like the death to all capitalists and there will be no freedom of speech in our glorious revolution and things like that. But that was their whole the structure of their debate was. You look at those stupid conservatives over there holding to their ideology. We have this pure sort of science of Marxism, right? Free from ideology and things like that. And of course, then the crux of my point in the debate at the end was just, well, you're also an ideology. You can't, say that I'm looking at you from this unbiased perspective. You've made no scientific claims at all. You're just saying this is scientific because Marx said so, and this is what he outlines in his book. Well, that's not a scientific claim at all. That's an ideological claim. And so that was, I think something that devout Marxists, if there are still such things as there were at the campus of Truman State University, that is something that they still think is kind of true.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny when you deal with these people, and when you look at historical figures like in the mention of Lenin or even Mao, there were so many opportunities to stop them. They were
Hmm.
powerless at periods of time, and they were very much in danger. And you wonder how much the world would have been different if somebody would have just murdered them,
Hmm.
like strangled them in their sleep back when they were beginning. Like Lenin was completely on the outs for a couple of years, and and he was just a horrible person. And
Right.
Mao was worse. But they also had their acolytes and their followers and their sycophants, and it's interesting um, because even people with horrific points of view can be very personable at times, and
Hmm.
it's very it's hard to understand how dangerous somebody could be if they really believe in this ideology, because it
Right.
could be rather pleasant before they
Right.
plunge the knife.
Right.
So yeah,
Yeah. He makes another really good point on 220, where he's talking about the bigger emphasis on revolution, right? He says that's one of the big influences from
yeah.
Nietzsche. Is like that was still very much an element in Marxism, where it was, you need to have this revolution, of the workers and things like that. But he says really after Nietzsche, that becomes a much stronger element. He says, revolution and the violence that accompanies it are, as we have seen, justified in modern political philosophy and provide the most arresting spectacles of modern political history. Revolution took the place of rebellion, faction, or civil war, all of which are obviously bad things, while revolution is the best and greatest event. Sort of
Mhm.
that idea of it's like the greatest, example of, a person's will to power that you can imagine, right? It's the throwing over of the state and trying to institute your own new perfect society by your own will and things like that. And I think he's got a very good point there about how that's a very much a blend of sort of the Nietzsche, will to power and, the Marxist ideals there.
100%. And then he bleeds into really describing the very accurately leftists, even to the modern day, where they talk about how they really want to care about people, and they seem very, loving on the surface, love is love type of thing.
Hmm.
But when they are faced with somebody who is of the left, who is tremendously violent and horrible, like terrorists or
Hmm.
people that are murderers, they have this weird perverted respect for them and
Hmm.
admiration for them because they say, well, they care so much. When he says they have a sneaking suspicion that they are face to face with men of real commitment, which they themselves lack, and that
Right.
commitment, not truth, is believed to be what counts. And that's so true because they don't have that kind of core belief system. They just become enamored, and of course that I think explains a lot of the infatuation with Hamas
Mm.
and the anti-Israel violence, and then of course in some ways um, would apply to the people that are really in favor of all the violence against the Palestinians too. In some ways,
Right.
I
Right.
mean, I'm not equating them, but there's this tendency, this human tendency to just really respect people who are willing to kill for their beliefs.
Hmm.
Uh, it's like, whoa, wait a second. Especially the leftists who purport to just care about people and just want to
Hmm.
spread love and sharing and that kind of stuff. But it really comes down to it. They really respect people that care enough to murder.
Right. And I mean, that kind of, is somewhat justified in a lot of the leftist, what they sort of glorify in the day to day, where if everything is just about doing everything you want to do and sort of the self-fulfillment, everything is very much centered on you. Well, then, of course, you're going to admire the people who are just taking that to the extreme, where they are, taking that very independent will, whatever I want to do is the right thing to do, kind of applying that writ large to some of these really terrible people. There's a certain amount of consistency there, kind of warped, really weird consistency, but it is there.
True. And then he goes on, I don't know, maybe I'm skipping a little bit, but he
No, that's
goes on
right.
to talk about on 222, there's a good point. I keep coming back to this theme over the last couple of years, but he calls it the diminution of man
Hmm.
and the impoverishment of his spiritual life as inimitably described by Nietzsche and strengthened Marxist position. So basically, like by diluting the value of men and denigrating the spiritual life, you're really empowering the Marxist thoughts and these
Hmm.
socialist thoughts and the communist thought the thinkers and the power to subjugate people because you don't believe that each individual person has a spiritual essence that cannot be unbroken.
Right.
And it's funny, like there was the thing that just happened last week with the Senator Tim Kaine, which I'm sure you probably meant and noticed, kind of like the same kind of thing where you see, it's the old argument about where our rights come from.
Hmm.
And I guess he hadn't read the Declaration of Independence or anything,
Hmm.
but for a United States senator to say that, but as he did in a congressional hearing, that the rights that we have come from the government,
Hmm.
and that is antithetical to anybody who believes in natural law and believes that our rights are endowed, that we have them as natural
Hmm.
rights given to us by our Creator. And I think this diminution of men and our spirituality is part and parcel of the philosophy that Tim Kaine's espousing, which is we only have rights to freedom of speech or
Right.
whatever because the government has given it to us, as
Right.
opposed to the government's there to protect the rights we already have.
Yeah, because he even went a little farther than that. Because he was saying like the idea that some people hold otherwise is scary. Like he's like that's a terrifying thought. 'Cause he compared anybody who believes that to like the Iranian government. It's like well they believe that their rights are given their right to rule is given by a creator. How are we so different, you and I? That really ridiculous sort of spiel he gave. And it's like well, you're a very terrifying force if you believe that anything other than us, your kind and benevolent government has given you right to do anything. And so it's yeah, I think it's very true that you have this sense of it's really just the government is the only real thing to a lot of people. If you want to talk about where rights come from, you can't find anything else other than the positive law. And then of course, to sort of free themselves from that, because it's a very like emptying thought to have. But then the
Yes.
left takes it and says, well, that just means that we should just overthrow this government and finally, these energies will be released that have been, burdened by this government, rather than saying, hang on, maybe we should look at, things that were more real and more fulfilling, in the past, in our own country, that was founded on the ideas that we do have natural rights that are inalienable given by God. It's just this ridiculous, warped idea that now we need to go even further away from those things to free ourselves.
And it's another example of how we dodged another bullet because that guy was going to be a vice president,
Yeah.
for free. And some bullets we didn't dodge, like Biden or Obama, but that it kind of I think helps explain how we got Trump, for crying
Yeah.
out loud. I mean, we have Trump, or as opposed to who
Hmm.
or what, and what's the philosophy behind these people?
Hmm.
Uh, and so if anybody's wondering, well, how in the heck we end up with Trump? It's because of Tim Kaine and the people. I mean, the Hillary Clinton's a Marxist, for crying out
Hmm.
loud. She always has been. I mean, she was a lefty way back when she was thrown off as an attorney of the Watergate Committee. I don't know if you knew that, but
Mm.
she was attorney for the Watergate Committee,
Wow.
and she got thrown off of it for alleged dishonesty way
Yeah.
back when. We're talking
Yeah.
about the 1970s. I mean, it's just. But anyway, we got
Yeah.
off a little sidetrack
No,
there.
I think it's true though, because I think there's a lot of things that have been happening recently that just show how divorced, the government is. A lot of people in politics are from, any sense of religion. I mean, you had all that stuff with so many of the people on the left just openly mocking prayer after
Yeah.
that shooting at
Wow.
the Catholic church and school. And now you have, Tim Kaine saying, you're ridiculous if you believe you have natural rights in any way. But then there's some good things, that you see on the right. Trump weirdly, I never expected him to ever do this, posted on Truth Social honoring the nativity of the Virgin Mary. He had
Yeah.
a post of, happy birthday, Mary, Queen of Heaven, or Queen of Peace, I think is what he said. And then, you have JD Vance commenting on that as well. So it's like, we have this weird sort of president who's probably not super religious himself, but he's like, honoring the nativity of the Virgin Mary, which
Yeah.
is kind of wild.
I think, and I've heard other people say this too, but immediately after he got shot at
Hmm.
Butler, I noticed a change in his tone,
Yeah.
in how he expressed himself, a great deal. And I think and I don't know if it was, you never know if it's genuine with politicians, but you can certainly see a change in emphasis.
Right.
And more, I still think, and I don't think we actually wagered on it, but I said he would convert to Catholicism this year, in 2025. I don't think he's going to make it before the end of the year, but
Hmm.
it would not surprise me at all
Yeah.
if he converted to Catholicism during, before he passed. I guess it's
Yeah.
I don't know if he's going to be able to survive his term. I mean, he's an older guy anyway.
Right.
Um, God knows how many people want to kill him at this point throughout the world, not just Americans.
Right.
Any of that. But yeah, you're right about the this whole idea that you're going to release the impulses and the freedom,
Hmm.
and the revolution will set you free. And anybody who's studied any sort of revolutions knows that's just bonkers. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a revolution, an armed insurrection, or whatever you want to call it, is just so um, destructive. I mean, sometimes you'd say it's necessary,
Hmm.
but even the American Revolution, man, that was a risky endeavor, and a lot of people died. I mean,
Hmm.
it's not beanball. But the revolutionaries of the left post Marxism think that's a good in and of itself, that the chaos is somehow good, and will liberate people from these ideologies and set you free, as the author has mentioned in
Right.
this chapter.
Because then he mentions a little bit about Freud, kind of connecting what he was saying about that, a couple chapters ago.
It's
Because
Freud. That's
Freud. I mean, but I think he's right that it was definitely wrapped up in a lot of the Marxist sort of thinking, and that he provided some sort of like spiritual impulse that wasn't really spiritual at all, right? It's very much like a very biological sort of reductionism, where it's like, well, you have these sort of desires and things like that that are more ethereal, but really it's just part of your human biology. But you sort of have that as sort of the grounding sort of spiritual impulse, and then Marx provides a good reason for why it's capitalism's fault that all that inherent creativity latent inside you hasn't been released. So it's like you do have that sort of marriage of those two things.
Yeah. And when you talking about psychoanalysis, he keys into something that I think is a way ahead of his time. On 225, he says, he's talking about the egalitarianism and how they view the opponents of
Mm,
the left. He says the egalitarian transformation of Weber, which is one of the thinkers he's really discusses in here a lot, permitted anyone who was not to the left to be diagnosed as mentally ill. And boy, that is so true, especially during almost the COVID lockdowns. But they were saying anybody who didn't agree with their ideology, or who was to the left of a commie, or to the
hmm.
right of a commie, I guess you'd say, is somehow mentally ill or mentally disturbed. And all the Trump supporters are mentally ill. And this, he describes this psychoanalysis of political opponents,
Right.
and basically diagnosing people that disagree with you as ill and sick in the head.
Hmm.
And I think that there's a lot of that going on. And of course, there's a lot of that going on, pointing at the left too now. But I
Right.
think there might be a little basis to that. I don't know. It seemed a little odd because they have other symptoms. But
Right. I mean, not to just keep going back to what we were just talking, but that was what Tim Kaine was saying. Like, you have to be somehow sick, you have to be somehow demented to believe that there is a creator and that you have rights coming from somewhere else. And that was just sort of common, talk among the left for
yeah,
the past few decades, where you
yeah.
just have this sort of, even if it's not sort of outright public, like, wow, all of these people who believe in God are stupid. It was just kind of the assumption that if you had any sort of, especially traditional religious leanings, it was just like, wow, how can you even believe that in the 21st century? You poor fool. Don't you know we're enlightened now? We're smarter than we've ever been. It's like, that's just ridiculous.
And it's so striking because, like, I haven't studied Buddhism, but I read a little bit about it, especially when I was in my 20s or something. But I don't think, I would not advocate that somebody should become a Buddhist monk and go up into the hills of Tibet and go or whatever.
Yeah.
But I can understand how that could bring peacefulness to
Mhm.
someone. I can understand why somebody would do it, and I wouldn't mock them if somebody shot up a Buddhist temple. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm saying, it's like, wait a second, but and especially if it was children,
Right.
and like the mayor of, was it Minneapolis, where
Hmm. Yeah.
he was, and he's saying, well, the prayers didn't help them. It's like, okay, I mean, um, it's really, really strange
Hmm.
that they don't see the value, but they're not spiritual. They don't, I don't think they believe that we have souls,
Hmm.
uh, or they don't believe that we in particular as conservatives or Republicans have souls.
Right.
Maybe
Right.
maybe they're creating out the people that are Catholic that somehow are not worthy or something. But it's a strange step for elected
Hmm.
officials to go that step further there, because they used to just say, prayers are great and we should all pray for, peace and safety and all that stuff and healing, but we need to do more. I mean, that's
Right.
what, the pro gun control people always say. We actually have to take concrete action, which I get that. I don't agree with any of their suggestions, but that's not what they're saying now.
Right.
They're saying you're wasting your time praying. The
Hmm.
praying's doing no good. The
Hmm.
praying didn't do any good to those children. I'm like, oh my gosh, I mean, um, it's just
Yeah.
strange. And it's this Marxist and this leftist devaluation of human life and human
Right.
spirituality and the desecration of man.
Especially, at the political time right now, it just seems such a weird step for them to take, where it's like, you would think you'd look around and realize, hey, we're kind of losing on a lot of the social issues here right now. Let's just attack all of religion. Like, why is that
Yeah.
the calculated move that they're making? Because it came from multiple people. I mean, you had the mayor of Minneapolis, you had Gavin Newsom, you had Jen Psaki, basically all saying the exact same thing, where it was that weird, what good did the prayer do them? And I guess they just thought that that was just such a common belief among even, I guess it is a certain common belief among portions of the left, maybe, but I can't see even
Oh,
just a lot of
no,
just,
it's
you think so?
100%, 100% of the
Mm.
left. I mean, when you look at church attendance, they're
Yeah.
100% they don't go to church. And then the ones that do go to church, they're the rainbow churches. And
Yeah.
what do they believe in? Nothing.
Yeah.
They're non-judgmental God. And so what's the point of that? Well, it's so
Hmm.
that we can be gods. And I really do think they just kind of forgot to
Right.
lie. I mean, because and they were upset, because we all get upset when such a tragedy happens, and their instant, impulse is to blame, of course, Republicans or conservatives, and then to denigrate anything other than their preferred policy preferences, which is what they've been doing my entire adult lifetime. And so I really do think that all of the left, everybody if you say, hey, are you a Democrat? If they don't say, oh, no, I'm an independent or whatever, if they actually identify as a Democrat, uh, they really don't believe in God
Mm.
in a meaningful way. Well, let's put it this way, maybe not God. They certainly aren't religious
Mm.
in a meaningful way, except for a small minority
Right.
uh, people on the left, and because they don't want to be constrained by they certainly aren't Christians in any sort of traditional sense, because I mean, there's a lot of judgment even in the New Testament. It's not just all, happiness, rainbows, and acceptance of others. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Jesus lays down a hard line on a
Yeah,
lot
what
of
is
stuff.
it? If anyone causes one of these little ones to sin, it'd be better for him if a millstone were wrapped around his neck and he were cast into the sea. That's
Yes.
that's not,
Well,
have fun and do whatever you want type
didn't
rhetoric.
he, didn't he say about Judas it would been better he had never been born? I
Yeah.
think I
Oh
think
yeah.
that. I mean,
Yeah. I
that's
mean,
a
you have,
harsh
I
thing.
came not to unite but divide, or I
Yes.
came not to bring peace but to divide. Yeah. I mean, you have quotes like that. I mean, all throughout the Bible.
Then the gospel this week was, you
Hmm.
have to hate your family,
Hmm.
enough to follow me.
Yeah.
Basically, I mean, it might have been a little bit
Yeah.
hyperbole, but
Well, that's it. We were
pretty
talking about that.
harsh.
Yeah, we were talking about that because we have like the grad student, Bible study thing that I go to, and I always bring my little Greek New Testament with me because people
Of
are always,
course,
oh,
of
of
course.
course I do. I mean, naturally, because people are always curious. What is the word in the original here? And it's a very literal word. The word is miseo, which is where we get like misogyny,
Hmm.
misandry, the mis. That's the hatred, and that's like
Yeah.
a very literal loathe, like have animus towards word. In the other gospels, Jesus tells the same thing, but it's framed in a slightly different way. Like love, your family less. You have to, prioritize me. But like in what was it? Was it in Luke this week? I think the reading was from Luke, I believe. But it's like actually no, you have to hate them if they are not bringing you towards me. You have to hate them because I come first.
And that's man, that's a really hard lesson to follow,
Right.
and to accept. And so so anyway, I think this whole Marxist philosophy that the author is describing, to get back to the book, is
Right.
100% accurate. And just really de-emphasizing the individual value and character of all humans is, I think, at the core of Marxism. Where
Mm.
you identify people as classes, as groups, as struggling, against this faction or that faction, and that you have to dehumanize people in order to have those values and espouse those political philosophies, because it doesn't work if you think everybody has an equal value morally.
Right. Right.
You end up with individual rights, and you end up with nothing but conflicts, because that's really what our government is trying to set up to try to do, is to mediate those inevitable conflicts between everybody else's individual rights.
Right.
Because my right to speak is going to offend you, or my right to
Mm.
stuff is going to maybe keep you from getting other stuff. I mean, the property rights and contract rights and that kind of stuff. So
Right.
it's interesting. I
Hmm.
do I did I'm not as familiar with the these political thinkers, and thinking of them as on the left or on the right, or how Nietzsche has now been adopted by the left or co-opted, or whatever
Hmm.
the like, argument the author is making. But he certainly makes a compelling case about that, and
Right.
in the chapter. So I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, I like the way he ends too, because I mean, on the topic of how exactly became so mainstream, I'm just going to read his ending here, which kind of teases the next chapter here. He says, academic psychology, sociology, comparative literature, and anthropology have been dominated by them, the left, for a long time. But their passage from the academy to the marketplace is the real story. A language developed to explain to knowers how bad we are has been adopted by us to declare to the world how interesting we are. Somehow the
Mhm.
goods got damaged in transit. Marcuse began in Germany in the 20s by being something of a serious Hegel scholar. He ended up here in the US writing trashy culture criticism with a heavy sex interest in One Dimensional Man and other well known books. In the Soviet Union, instead of the philosopher king, they got the ideologist tyrant. In the United States, the culture critic became the voice of Woodstock. I think that's really true. I mean, once all of that, because I mean, it was always kind of in the American academies ever since it began, because you always just kind of get left wing nuts in universities anyway. But then once it spread into the American popular culture, I mean, that's when everything kind of exploded from there in the 60s and 70s. And that's what he'll talk about, looks like, next week.
Truth. Yes.
Yes. All right. Well, do you have any other final thoughts on
I
this
have
chapter?
nothing left. I'm empty.
All right. Well, you can, of course, follow us on Twitter at ULMTD Opinions. This has been season 12, episode 11. I've been Adam Bishop.
Still Mark Bishop.